Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, the day has finally arrived. The Bucks are in Boston taking on the Celtics, and Khris Middleton is set to make his season debut. So we take a look at the road to this, what it means for the units on the floor, and just what it means for the Milwaukee Bucks overall. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day each and every day. And remind you, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter as we introduce the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox daily. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. Lockedondaily.com, where you go to sign up for the all-new, all-free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Start your day with that source. And today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Camille, we kept saying it's close. It's going to be close. Doc Rivers said it. Doc Rivers, a little more open than usual about this. Not that Doc is ever a closed book in the last few days, and we started to hear Khris with more 5-on-5. But Bobby Marks, the guy breaking the news that tonight in Boston, Khris Middleton makes his season debut.
It's about time, Frank. It's about time, Justin. It's about time. I had to even go in the closet and bring out the old school Bucks sweatshirt in celebration that Khris Middleton is finally back. We've been hearing that Khris is, soon and close for like a month and a half now. So to get to the date now where it's scheduled for him to finally make his debut against the Boston Celtics of all teams as well, like it makes this day even better. And the last Celtics game is one of the ones in particular we're watching. And I was like, man, the Bucks really miss Khris Middleton in this game. Like, this is a game where they need Khris Middleton. So not putting a lot on Khris, saying like, we have to win because Khris is here and like there's so much on his shoulders. But it is just, it's a relief to finally be out of the phase of when is Khris coming back, have a date, know he's getting back on the court. And now the questions become like, what does the rotation look like? How do you reintegrate Khris into the lineup? And having those conversations more around ball rather than like, when is he actually coming back? So I'm excited.
He has played 35 games in his career against the Boston Celtics. There's only one team that Khris Middleton has faced more. So we often joke that, Khris owns the Celtics, but we've seen a number of those performances. The only team he's played more, speaking of apropos here, is the Indiana Pacers. And we saw what he did against the Pacers in that playoff series. But that is the big piece to get him back for this, as you touched on, final matchup against the Boston Celtics. But that's what stood out the most to me is, man, I know it's close, but wow, kudos to Khris that you say, okay, Boston, I'm ready. This is where I want to come back, because we see a lot of guys that'll say, okay, it's feeling good. I think I'm ready to go in the next couple of days here. What do we got on the schedule? At Boston, at Brooklyn. Yeah, I'll come back Sunday against the Brooklyn Nets. But no, Khris Middleton just jumping right into the deep end.
And I love that. Doc mentioned the fact that I forget who asked him. It might have been Jim Wazowski from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel asking like, hey, like looking at your schedule, is there a time you're looking to bring Khris back based on the schedule that you have? And Doc responded like, listen, when guys are ready, they're going to be ready to play. We're not looking at the schedule so much. I don't know how much I believe of that wholeheartedly, that they're not looking at the schedule at all when a guy comes back. But to your point about Khris looking to come back against the Celtics, I mean, what a birthday gift for Giannis as well, to get your partner back who you've been on this team with since you got to Milwaukee, heading into Boston for that last matchup, which again, such a weird scheduling quirk that all three Celtics matchups are done before the end of the year. So it's going to be one of the last times we get to see this matchup, one of the last times we get this measuring stick game, but at least we get one with Khris Middleton. Although the caveat to that is going to be, it's Chris's first game back. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's going to be a minutes limit of some sort. The rotations aren't
Mhm.
going to look the way they would look if this team is healthy come April, but it's something. So that's the part of it that gets me excited. Like already a big matchup, and you add on the fact that it's also Chris's return to that, like it just amps up the stakes, I think. And I'm sure ESPN is very happy that they have this game on their network tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important thing to keep in mind is I am 99.9% certain there will be a minutes restriction on Khris, not just tonight, but
Mhm.
probably for the first handful of games that he plays in. But the other part that makes sense about the return being now too is I touched on this on the post-game radio show, but we don't know the schedule fully yet. We just know one of the missing 2 games that the Bucks are going to have coming up here. But we do know there is going to be a lot of time off between games. You play tonight, you play Sunday afternoon in Brooklyn, then you're back home Tuesday. So normal cadence there. But after that, extended time off. If you win Tuesday, you don't play again until Saturday in
Mhm.
Las Vegas. Then if you win that game, you get 2 days off, and you would play Tuesday, the following Tuesday, in the championship game. If you lose, you don't play again until the 20th. So basically a full week off as you're making up your 2 games there, 6 days off. It would be for the Bucks. And if you lose on Tuesday, um, I've seen a glimpse of what the schedule would be. All I can say is it's a lot of time off if you lose on Tuesday from when you would next play. So this is a good spot for the Bucks to bring him back. And it's not just the Bucks dictating this. This is Chris's health and
Mhm.
how he feels. It's a good spot for all parties too to say, okay, you came back. We know there's going to be some soreness, and we know there's going to be those adjustments, but now
Mhm.
you start to look ahead to a lot of time off to really get that rest and be ready to go forward.
In addition to the rest that they'll get during the interesting scheduling quirks over the next 2 weeks, given the NBA Cup, it also gives them a chance to practice a bit as well, which we hear so much about over the NBA season, where based on the schedule, you just don't tend to find too much time to get the team together and have practices and go through things and work on things. So with all of that time off, it is going to allow for rest for sure, but also time for this team to get together in the gym, get some practice in, get some reps in, and start really installing some of those things and getting used to having Khris on the floor with rotations that he hasn't gotten a chance to hit the court with so far since he's been out with injury. And again, excited to see what that looks like for this team. Maybe not immediately, but over the next couple of weeks as they get used to it, given the fact that Doc Rivers mentioned how there were certain installations they were waiting to install until Khris got back. We've heard rumblings about a possible small ball lineup with Giannis at the center and Khris been manning that 4 spot next to him. So time to practice what that looks like. So in addition to the rest, there's also practice time. I think it's going to be really valuable for this team getting Khris back at this juncture in the season.
Yeah, all I can say or will say is if you lose Tuesday, it is more than 3 days off that you are going to have between then and the next game that you would have to make up. That would be either way, win or lose. Your next game is against either the Knicks or the Atlanta Hawks, and then there's some variables in play as well, whether that would be home or road if you lose. But either way, you're going to get a lot of time off here starting Tuesday and onward. One of the other big items of discussion is how do you use Khris Middleton? We've seen a lot of people weigh in on that. I do want to start to briefly get into that, just a little bit of an appetizer on that. I think that's a full episode
Yeah.
discussion, but we'll start to take some look ahead to that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, Camille, the discussion over how to use Khris Middleton. So, like I said, this is a lengthy discussion, and there's more to break down once we see some of those groupings and lineups on the floor. I know our friend Brian Sampson that runs Bucks Film Room has some thoughts on this. I think we'll probably see if we can get him on the show next week to dig into that and what we saw in Chris's first, maybe even first 2 games over the weekend in Brooklyn. Frank has shared some thoughts, but let's start with the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
Does Khris Middleton start tonight or come off the bench?
Tonight, I could see him coming off the bench, just kind of getting those minutes underneath him. I could see him coming off the bench to start for the first couple of games of his return, just to get him back into the rotation, get his legs back underneath him, get him used to the speed of the NBA game. And then once those minutes start to stabilize, I would prefer to see Khris get put back into that starting lineup personally. What about you?
I'm aligned there too. Like, I guess if you forced me to make a call, I would say he probably comes off the bench tonight, but even that I'm not sold on. I mean, we've seen him doing 5-on-5s and everything else, and he has that natural chemistry with Giannis. I agree with the last part that, once he gets his feet under him and once you get all that in the plate, then yeah, he has to start. Not to give away the lengthier discussions that we plan on having next week, but I think you and I are aligned on this. The long and short of it is, number one, I mean, these guys haven't played a lot under Doc Rivers. It was, 6 games last year since Doc took over, or parts of 6 games that you had that trio. Now you factor in, Gary Trent Jr. is a new piece. The impact that we've seen from the young guys in AJ and Ajax. That's something else that you have to, okay, how does Khris fit with this? But the most important part of it is maximizing that trio to get, and we should probably stop with the trio. Brooke Lopez is every bit as important. Yeah. So maximizing those 4 guys, I just have an issue seeing how you can do that if Khris is your 6th man. Like, I get wanting to say, okay, well, we need him for the playoffs, and we found this role where we can reduce his minutes or keep him where we feel comfortable, and then we can pick things up in the postseason. Let him just slide into that role. I mean, it would be one thing if this full group of Khris and Dame and Giannis and all the new pieces have been together for the last 3-4 years and played extensively. But that's not the case with the change that we've seen and near the bottom of the roster seemingly on an annual basis now. And, of course, the big Dame for Drew Holiday piece there. So I just struggle with, well, how can you truly maximize that if, in theory, if you're coming off the bench, you're entering the game at the point that Giannis is exiting. Like, I know you can make up for it later in the game, but that should be the thought process is these minutes, if Khris is playing 20 minutes, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure 75% or more of those minutes are with Giannis on the floor.
Yeah, you want to maximize the lineup combinations, I think, as well with Khris Middleton. Like, I understand why there are people who want Khris to come off the bench. And as we record this live on YouTube, for everybody in the comments, let us know as well if you would prefer to see Khris off the bench or Khris in the starting lineup, once he's healthy. But I think one of the arguments for Khris off the bench is so that he can juice up those bench lineups and he can be the guy to really kind of take command of those lineups. But I don't necessarily think he has to come off the bench for that to be the case, given the fact that with Dame and Giannis and Khris, you are looking to stagger those guys as much as you can so that you have at least one of them on the court at all periods of the game. And I think that you can still do that with Khris starting just based on how you do those rotations. In addition to that, we haven't seen the starting lineup hit some of the same benchmarks it did last year with the numbers. Like, I believe with Giannis and Dame on the court, they're pretty much even. Like, they're not really outscoring too many people, and they're not losing the minutes greatly either. Like, it's kind of even while those two are on the court. And I would think that adding Khris Middleton onto the court with the two of them should really do some benefits for the Bucks production as well. So I want to see Khris start. We talk about a lot the gravity that Giannis and Dame create and what that does for those third shooters. When that third guy is Khris Middleton, the other teams are leaving open because of the gravity of Dame and Giannis. Like, I want to see that more often than not.
Yeah, and I think the point too about the bench lineups, or juicing those units, it's not fixed per se, but it's been much better. Certainly over the course of the last 11 games when the Bucks have really started to take off, but as the season has kind of started to pick up here, and Doc Rivers himself had said he's kind of figured out what works and what lineups to roll with here, or what groupings to roll with. Their bench is averaging about 37 points per game, starting with that win against the Jazz, and it was horrendous early in the season that you just couldn't find the right mix. You had a couple of games scoring in the teens from your second unit, and that's the other thing too is I guess I push back a lot of times when people just point to your bench production of like, man, look at where the Bucks bench ranks. The theory of this team's bench is not to lead the league in scoring or be pushing for that. You have Giannis and Damian Lillard in your starting lineup, and now you got Khris Middleton, we think, back in the starting lineup. You just need that group like you and I have talked about before, in the early Bud years, where your bench was there to just play defense and preserve leads. Like, find guys that can make shots, yes, like AJ Green and what he's done, Gary Trent Jr. too. Like, you need scoring. You can't just roll with defense only. But I think they've found that mix. So, and again, it's not just bench per se, but it's when you have, when Giannis is off the floor or when Dame is off. Like, now you can work in those scenarios where both Giannis and Damian Lillard would be off the floor. Granted, you don't want to do that a ton,
Right.
but if you have Khris Middleton, you say, okay, we got Khris, we got other guys that can shoot. So we know Khris can set them up and they can knock down shots. That fixes a whole lot of problems we saw very early in the year.
It does. And the fact that Gary Trent Jr. is now somebody who's coming off your bench rather than somebody who you have penciled in as your starting two guard changes the dynamics as well, especially with how well Trent has been shooting over the last few weeks. Having him come off the bench with an AJ Green, with the Bobby Portis, which I see a comment from Dennis here in regards to Khris Middleton, just saying that Khris should take Portis's minutes. And I do think that that's something that we can see going forward. I know we'll have a lot more time to kind of dive into what we think his return will continue to do to the rotation. But I do think that Bobby Portis is somebody who, I shouldn't say is at risk of losing minutes, but I think that he's somebody on that list who could lose some minutes because of Khris's return if they do want to utilize Khris in that small ball four lineup a bit more, which is something that I was wanting to see a little bit more last season. I think it can just throw a really interesting look. And then too, you put Khris in the starting lineup eventually, and you also bring a Taurean Prince off of the bench, the league's best three-point shooter by percentage at the moment. So I think that the bench will be able to survive if Khris is starting. Again, you're staggering your big three anyway, so you're trying to have one of them on the court with the bench as it goes. So I just think that Khris coming back, it adds so much more to this team, another playmaker, somebody else who can just do the little things and kind of be that glue piece for all of his teammates.
Yeah, and granted, you haven't had to deal with this every single game, but we've had moments that have stood out during the season where you just think like, man, you really miss Khris here. Like, you referenced a few of those games. I go back to that game a week plus ago in Miami, against the Heat, when Damian Lillard goes supernova, but in the second half, when the Heat strategy was, okay, we got to blitz and trap him and get the ball out of his hands, those minutes where Dame was off the floor, the issue the Bucks just kept running into was you got AJ Green, you got Taurean Prince and other guys that can and have been shooting on the floor. But how are you going to get them the ball? Like, who's going to get them set up? That was what they kept running into. And again, just having another guy in the form of Khris Middleton that we've talked about, his ability to run the offense and be your de facto backup point guard, that changes things big time for this team. So I am very, very obviously excited to see this group go forward, to see this matchup tonight in Boston, and to see some of the tweaks that Doc Rivers has kind of hinted at. Because there's one other one, I think we saw it brought up in the comments. I talked about this with Marcus and Chris Johnson on their show last week, but there's one other thing that Doc Rivers keeps leaving out there that we haven't fully been able to see yet, but you get the sense this is how Doc wants to play. We'll get into that discussion and take a look at what to expect from the Boston Celtics coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. Well, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Camille, that thing that we have heard Doc Rivers kind of tiptoe around, or at least bring up briefly, is the Bucks playing small. And, we've heard him talk about these groupings that we just can't go to right now. I'm curious to see if this is a tear the Band-Aid off. We're going to play a lot of small ball lineups, and we can kind of, pick and choose where our lineups with Giannis and Brook, where our lineups with Brook, where our lineups with just Giannis, because we got Taurean Prince that can play the 4. We've got Khris Middleton that I think can play the 4. You still got Bobby Portis as well, but some like tonight, for example, in Boston, hasn't always been a great Bobby Portis matchup. So when you get to those spots, you can say, okay, we feel really great about what AJ Green has given us, what Gary Trent Jr. is giving us, to have Taurean Prince too. Like, we've got these other wings that we can depend on. I know nobody wants to hear it. Pat Connaughton. We've got these guys that we feel like, we suddenly have wings that we can play. So it's not we can't do that, because then you're stuck with, in the past, last year, if you were trying to do this, Damian Lillard and campaign in your backcourt, Damian Lillard and Pat Beverly playing together. Like, they've evolved past that. So I'm very curious to see when we start to see Doc Rivers infuse some more of these small ball lineups, and how frequently we see that.
In the offseason, we were hearing a lot about how the Bucks wanted to be more versatile defensively. And we took that as, well, maybe they're looking to trade Brook Lopez and try to do a completely different defensive scheme. And as the season has unfolded, we've heard what Buck has come in and talked about doing, where he's like, hey, like, we just want to make sure we have one of our bigs by the rim. We want a little bit more switching from our perimeter players, so on and so forth. We always want to make sure we have a big by the rim. And thinking of what Chris's return does for this roster, it offers a bit more lineup versatility as well for the team, a different way that you could possibly play. And to your point about Boston being an interesting matchup for somebody like a Bobby Portis, because they tend to be a little bit smaller outside of KP and Al Horford, where it's like,
athletic with
it's a more athletic team, where it's like, well, how do you combat that? Because you don't want Bobby on Tatum or Brown or anything like that. So it gives you another pitch to be able to throw, which I think is the part of it that makes me the most excited about Chris's return. I mean, a lot of reasons to be excited about Khris returning. I've been on the record before saying Khris is one of my favorite Bucks players. So I'm excited to see him come back just off general principle, but what he can also do lineup wise, if Doc gets really creative with it. Like, I'm really interested to see what he does, especially against a team like the Celtics. Again, we might not see it tonight, because it's the first time that Khris is back. It's our last matchup against the Celtics, but against other teams that can play a bit smaller, like, to see how the Bucks can combat that with Khris back in the lineup, what type of rotations they can pull out, will be really interesting to see, because it's nice to have the versatility. You go against a smaller team, you can go that way. You play against like a Cleveland that you need your double bigs because they're playing double bigs, and you can do that as well. So the versatility lineup wise that Khris offers this team, I think, is going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah, and to that point, it's not just the Celtics too. It's other teams that you're going to have to figure out those matchups with. I think we mentioned the Celtics so frequently because that's the gold standard. I mean, I know what the Cavs are doing here in the regular season, but the Celtics are the gold standard right now. They won the championship last year, and they've been that group for 2+ years now. You oftentimes will hear the pushback of, let's say the Bucks roll out a lineup for stretches that's Giannis at the 5, Taurean Prince, Khris Middleton, and Dame, and then pick whoever it is that playing the other guard spot. Like, well, that's not as good as what Boston has. That doesn't stack up with Boston. Like, maybe, maybe not in terms of your defensive ability, but the point is, in most of those scenarios, you were dead in the water. If you were just playing bigs and playing slower and a different tempo of play and don't have that switchability on the perimeter, especially against 5-out teams, you have the ability to do that. Is it as good defensively as Boston or Oklahoma City? Probably not, but you can at least get into those situations. And then it ultimately boils down to, look, you know how to offset that? Hit shots. Like if you can at least hold your own in those settings, but your offense is scoring, that's what changes that. It's the other where we saw the Bucks run into problems, in that series that's already 3 years ago against the Celtics. And in regular season moments, again, not just against the Celtics, other teams where you're playing with what you have. And it's not a fault of Bud or Doc or any of these coaches in the past, because that was the hand that you were dealt. This is the makeup of your group. So this is how you have to play. And that brought you a large deal of success. But that was the other big part of the offseason was we talked about, okay, I can start to envision a world where they have some of that versatility that you mentioned, and they have these different looks that they can throw out there. And I'm very curious to see how different, if at all, we see things tonight in Boston.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited. I'm very, very excited for this game. I mean, it's a Friday night game. It's nationally televised. It's against the Celtics. It's everything that you would want. And as we get ready to wrap here, Justin, I just want to ask you as well, like, with this being the last matchup against Boston of the year, the regular season, I should say, there's a chance you can see Boston in the playoffs here. But what are you looking to see in this game? Because I went to clean the glass and just wanted to take a look at those two teams, the Celtics and the Bucks, since the last time they played each other on November 10th. And since then, the Bucks have, they've rattled off a few different wins here. The defense has improved. We've seen the offense.
Do you have the
takes
numbers?
Jumps.
Do you have the numbers up in front of you?
I do. So since the last time,
I would guess.
Go ahead.
The Bucks are, well, I think they have had a few aided by garbage time, so that's going to bring down the numbers. But my guess would be, since these teams last played, the Bucks are within at least like a 1.5 per 100 possessions defensively of the Celtics.
The Bucks have had a better defense than the Celtics since the last time that they played. The Bucks since that time, so starting from November 11th until today, the Bucks have the 12th ranked defense at a 111.9 rating, and the Celtics have the 16th at a 114.2. Now, that Celtics offense has continued to roll, second best in the league over that time, scoring 123.
And a big piece of that is without Kristaps Porzingis.
Right. Like rolling, and the Bucks offense has been 7th in the league over that time as well. So you see this Bucks team with a 9th best net rating in the league over that time, plus 6.3. But the Celtics have the 5th best plus 9.7. So two teams have been playing well. We knew the Celtics were. We've been seeing the Bucks playing well as well. But the competition has been the sticking point for people talking about what the Bucks have done over the last couple of weeks of like, who have you been playing to get these numbers? So I think the Celtics game for me is one of those. It's a measuring stick game at this point in the season. You don't take too much of it from a win or a loss, but it's just a good time to see where you are.
It's funny. I think I can divulge. Like Frank and I were talking after we recorded the post gamer. What game was that even? The last post game that Frank and I did Tuesday night, right? Yeah.
Pistons.
The Pistons, the clincher. Frank and I were talking after that about, all right, here's the schedule in front of you for the rest of the week. Like, what if I told you, and trading off would you rather take this loss if it means this, and yada, yada, yada. And the point, I think his question was, if I told you you will win tomorrow against Atlanta, win Sunday against the Hawks, and win next Tuesday against the Orlando Magic, would you be fine with a loss to the Celtics? And I said, absolutely. I said, absolutely. Like I have a feeling most Bucks fans say, no, I want to beat the Celtics. But if I'm taking 3 regular season wins, fine. Like, yes, give me that. And also, we've seen the Bucks beat the Celtics, split season series with the Celtics, have close losses, just as we saw earlier this year, and it just didn't matter in the end of the regular season. So, like, yes, give me these wins. But now that you see Khris Middleton back, I think I'm almost willing to change my answer on that. Of like, no, I'll take the win tonight, provided it means they do beat Brooklyn on Sunday, because we talked about two things you got to look for if this is the turnaround, and like this, the Bucks, they're here to stay now. Start beating good teams, so you get a chance to do that tonight. And Brooklyn's playing better. They keep hovering around there and surprising people. As of this moment, Brooklyn is still 9th in the East at 10-13. But like those types of games, start to win those too. Like, we're not saying you have to win every single game against the Celtics and the Cavs and the Thunder, but you can't go over. You got to start to win some of those, and then win those games against the teams like the Nets, and especially how we saw the Bucks get their motivation or get that revenge against the Chicago Bulls. Looking to do the same Sunday in Brooklyn. And then, of course, Saturday, we will all keep an eye on the injury report. I mean, I have no reason to believe Khris Middleton would not play Sunday. If it was, I'm waiting until I feel good and I'm fully ready to come back. Well, you got a day off. I know it's an early tip, but I don't have that fear of, man, well, he's going to play in Boston, and then he's not going to play Sunday, and then he's going to play Tuesday, and then yada, yada, yada. But as we close here, Celtics just played, what was that, Tuesday night in the Cup without Jason Tatum and Drew Holiday. Drew is not on the injury report for tonight, so he will be playing. But Jason Tatum is still questionable with that right patella tendinopathy. That's what he missed the game with. Drew's was a left patella tendinopathy. Kristaps Porzingis is questionable. Al Horford is questionable with a big toe sprain as well. So it may be the, hey, you didn't get the full strength Celtics, and that's why you beat them narrative that's going to be coming out.
You can only play who's in front of you. And over the stretch where the Bucks have found a way to dig themselves out of that 2-8 start, we talked about the fact that, sometimes in the years past, earlier in the season, we've seen them lose to bad teams. So a step in the right direction for this Bucks team is taking care of business. They've been doing that. That next step is like, hey, let's see what it looks like against some better competition. We've seen them hang around with the Cavaliers this season. We've seen them hang around with the Celtics. I could care less who the Celtics have on the court, who they don't have on the court, because, again, we spent this whole year without Khris Middleton as it is. So, look, you only play who's in front of you. It is what it is. There's still going to be a challenge because of their scheme and how they play. They just have so many different interchangeable pieces where they're going to put up 50, 55 threes in the game, so you better be ready for that ball movement. They're going to test you. And all in all, it's going to be a fun day. It's Giannis's birthday. It's the Khris return. Like, I'm here for it all, Justin. I'm here for it all.
And two quick things as we get out of here, Camille. I saw another comment. Will Pat ever play again now that Khris? Yes, he will. Like, we saw it Tuesday night. Doc even said in that game, you have these scheduled games where you look at it and say, maybe I should play 12 guys, at least in the first half, to save some legs. Injuries happen, everything else. So, yes, we will see Pat again. And a friend of the show, Ron, points out it is St. Nick's Day. Did you celebrate that as a kid? Did you always wake up and okay?
Not a St. Nick's household. My mom said, Saint who? No. You got Santa and that's it.
Well, for those that do, what a gift to wake up to. Granted, we saw it yesterday, but still to wake up and see that. What a day for Bucks fans. And now we wait to see how things go tonight in Boston against the Celtics. But Khris Middleton is back, making his season debut in some 10 hours or so from now. That'll do it for today's show. We will have the post-game recap of the Brooklyn Nets game as your Monday episode. And who knows, Camille? I mean, we'll see what Frank is interested in.
Yeah.
If something massive happens tonight, we may have some type of show for you tomorrow as well. But that'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you once again on Locked On Bucks.